All right. Today we're going to be going through the Burp Suite Certified Practitioner exam, and I've got my buddy Reed here to go through it with me, just so we have a few more nuanced perspectives on the topic. So let's just jump into that. First, we'll just do our introductions. Reed, do you want to talk about, I don't know, your experience before taking this exam, or a little bit about yourself if you feel the need?
Yeah, I would just say I'm a recent college grad. Got a job doing pen testing. At the time of starting to study for this exam, probably had about 2 to 3 months of web app pen test experience. Probably had done a handful of labs, but not a ton of experience before this. And I found this incredibly helpful in my career path.
Thanks. And I had pretty similar experience, recent college graduate, like last May or so. Uh, I played CTFs for a couple years before that, but none of my understanding of web app vulnerabilities was very nuanced or deep in a way that was actually meaningful. It was just kind of learning by doing CTFs, which is really easy to forget sometimes. And then at the time when I started studying for this exam back in October, I had only been working as a penetration tester for, about 2 to 3 months. So most of the work does center around, or at least that I did, was around web apps and API stuff. But like Reed said, I had a really similar experience with this, enriching um, my performance professionally, and especially my enjoyment in the work. I feel, especially as you're like a new employee, it's really easy to feel um, like the work that you're being asked to do is like so far beyond you, and this really helps you bridge that gap and helps you feel a lot more confident, especially for little things like writing reports. Like if you go through the material, you take good notes, you really understand the vulnerabilities, your like even your report writing will be enhanced by learning this kind of stuff. But that's an overview of our experience as it was when we began taking or studying for this stuff. Let's go ahead and talk about the exam itself. I'll talk about cost consideration, and then we'll kind of do both of us for prerequisites in the environment. But for the cost, in order to take this exam, you need to buy a voucher. It's 99 bucks, which for what you're getting here, in my opinion, a pretty hard web application test. I think it's pretty good. The only caveat is that unfortunately, you need a Burp Suite professional license to get use out of certain tools, like some of the extensions that are a big help and plugins, and the Burp scanner and target and the collaborator and all that good stuff. I suppose you could try and use a cracked version. However, when you take the exam, you're going to have to download your project file for the time you took the exam and submit it. So using a cracked license will obviously, they'll catch you and probably just, you know, not let you pass the exam for that reason. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't try it. Um, but Burp Suite professional license isn't cheap, so keep that in mind when you think about pursuing this. Either way, I think that the course materials on Portswigger or their web academy is very, very valuable for the price of free. I mean, I don't think you'll find web application stuff there at that high quality with such high quality labs for free. So I would highly recommend, even if you don't plan on taking the exam, definitely go through those materials and play all the labs because they're worth learning about. But Reed, how about you go over the prerequisites for the exam
Yeah,
briefly?
so for the prerequisites, I believe at the time of taking the exam, Portswigger has 12 different topics. And I believe to take the exam, you have to complete at least one lab from each topic. Some you are required more than different ones. And then they also have the mystery labs. The mystery labs, oh wait, here we have the specs here. You need to
Yeah.
take 23 apprentice labs, 8 specific practitioner labs, and 5 mystery labs, as well as one of 2 of the available practice tests. So that's the minimum requirement right there. I think the amount of apprentice labs is probably okay. I don't think you're going to get full coverage of everything you're going to see
You are
on the
not gonna get full
material with
coverage.
23. Yeah.
I think like of the available modules, I mean, all of these here, I actually never took the time to count all of these, but I mean, there's what? 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 14, 16, something like 30. There's like 31 or 32 topics. Maybe if I, let me go on my other monitor here and look at the like Web Security Academy and see how many topics there are. That might actually, maybe not. Oh well, there's easily over 100 different labs you could do. Um, like yeah, so there's 58 apprentice labs, 168 practitioner labs, and 38 expert labs. So there's no shortage of material on there, even though the requirements to actually take the exam are so few. That's kind of an issue I have with this. Like, you only need to do 5 mystery labs, but when I was prepping, I did way more than that. And, like, they only require you to take 1 practice exam, which I guess is fair, especially if you're confident. But, at the same time, you know, if you can prepare more, you might as well prepare more if you have the time. Uh, and then the other thing we could go through briefly is the exam environment. And it's if you take the practice exam, and this is on Bort Swigger's website, so it's not like I'm just, it's not like I'm revealing some secret information, but the practice exam, the way that you complete the stages and the way that you interact with the web applications is identical in substance to the exam. So if you're nervous about the differences between the labs and the exam, do the practice exam and expect basically a carbon copy of the uh, you know testing environment for that, as far as like how you're going to be interacting with the web apps and how you're going to be completing stages and proving that you completed stages. um, Aside from that, I mean, did I miss anything, or I think
I would
that's
just add that with the practice exams, they're definitely, while only one is like required, taking both is definitely recommended, especially because I think it would be pretty difficult to pass the exam first try without completing both, because knowing how to use the exploit server that's a part of the exam is crucial to getting the test done in the 4 hour time block. Because while 4 hours is a lot of time, it doesn't leave you time to troubleshoot for an hour or to a singular phase of the exam.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll kind of use that. Let's use that to segue into the next slide here. But before we do that, I want to talk about this table that I spent oh so long making. Other people have made tables like this before, and it's because the exam has 3 distinct stages. The first stage, you go from an anonymous user, so without an account, to compromise a user account. The second stage, you escalate to an administrator account, and then the third stage, you exfiltrate some data from the underlying web server. Because of that, certain, exploits, at least in the context of the labs and what we learned to do through the Web Academy, are only relevant for certain stages. So I made this table here to kind of multi-tier it, because like in like, for example, the SQL injection labs, like there's some where you get initial access with SQLI. There's some where there's a lot more where you compromise another user, or like read a database that has another user's password, or there's other ones where you read data from the underlying system. So in this case, the darker color is most likely, the lighter color is possible, but maybe don't consider it first. And the blanks here are, there were either very few or no labs that had you do anything with this topic relevant to that stage. So like, um, for example, like request smuggling, there's not a single request smuggling lab that has you go from an authenticated user or an unauthenticated user to dumping information about the underlying from the underlying web server. So that's kind of what this table is meant to represent. I've got it posted on my blog, but it's also an image, so it's going to be about the same thing. You can't copy and paste it or get much use out of it other than looking at it or using it during your exam. But that's about all we've got to go through about the exam itself. As far as preparation, Reed, you were talking about taking the practice exams, and I agree with you in the sense that, like, I don't know why they only require you to take one. What I would say personally is, for the first one, just get comfortable with the environment and how it works and playing with the exploit server specifically in the practice exam. And then for the second one, I would try to go for a realistic time, which, given a practice exam is about half of a real exam, try to do it in under 2 hours. Even though you can go longer than that, I would try to do the practice exam in under 2 hours. Don't do it like before you've completed all the topics, because you're not going to get the most value out of seeing it. at that point in time. But I don't know. That's what I would recommend there for the practice exams. For actual studying and note taking, um, I think Reed, you want to go over how you took notes and how you prepared?
Yeah, I would just say, as you're going through and you're doing your labs, you definitely want to do a few labs from every section. I would say you want to definitely complete every practitioner lab that's available right now, to guarantee first try or maybe even like second try success. While you're going through those, you want to be taking notes. So when you're doing, say, the SQL injection ones, you want to be like noting like what works a lot, because you'll notice, for the SQL injection ones specifically, you can do, I think, almost all of them with SQL map. It's definitely good to use that because you can use that on the exam. Unlike other exams out there, they do encourage you to use SQL map. But it's also good to do a few by hand or manually with the intruder, because there is a chance on the exam that you're going to run into one that doesn't work on SQL map because of some protection that they have up. So making sure you get a balance of both is important.
Yeah. Um, I would say a balance of both. In addition to, like, when you're going through, what I did, I went through all of the labs, or at least the vast majority of them, multiple times. And I think the after you've gone through them a couple times, the apprentice labs are largely a waste of your time, I think, as far as getting ready for this exam, because I think most of the vulnerabilities are going to be practitioner level or above. And when you go through the mystery labs, I would also keep it practitioner level or above, just because that's like the kind of, if you can get a practitioner level one, you can get an apprentice level of the same type, no problem most of the time. Unless it's some weird one like information disclosure where it's like you dump a GitHub repository that's accessible in the URL. But with like the SQL injection one, I would always identify it either manually by hand by looking at one parameter or something, or using like the Burp scanner or active or passive, either the active scan or the scan defined insertion point tools. Those are so handy for finding a bunch of these more nuancy ones. For cross-site scripting and anything of the like, the DOM invader is super useful. Even if it doesn't give you an exploit to use right away, it definitely tells you where to look sometimes. Just make sure you have it configured so it's not giving you a bunch of false positives. Um, and what I would do for like wrapping back to the SQL thing, identify it manually and then throw it over to SQL map once you know there's something there, or at least once you're fairly certain. And then I think there's only one SQL injection lab that SQL map itself won't get, and that's if you need to XML encode your payloads. And I don't know if SQL map has a setting for that. But um, as far as what I did to prepare, I think the mystery labs are the best way to get good at quickly identifying vulnerabilities. The day before the exam, or not the day before, the morning before I took the exam, I did around 18 mystery labs in a row, trying to make sure I got all of them in less than 15 minutes. And the day before that, I did like 12 or 13. It's kind of overkill, but I mean, you'd rather be prepared when you're taking the exam, because if you identify it and you at least know that you're in the right spot and you're looking for the right vulnerability, you're not going to really feel like the time is just wasted. Whereas if you were like spending 20 minutes trying to get cross-site scripting to throw when really it's like, like web cache poisoning or some other similar thing, that's something that the mystery labs I think would help you avoid as a pitfall. I definitely prepared really overkill for this, because I don't know, that's just the way that I am. But you could definitely get away with just taking notes on the first pass through all the topics if they're new to you, and then giving all of the practitioner level labs a once over, and then doing the mystery labs and the practice exams. I think that would do you well. There's also a few like extensions for Burp Suite that worked really well for me. Like the Turbo Intruder, I didn't use directly when doing the Mystery Lab stuff, but the Request Smuggler relies on that, and I used the request smuggler to look for request smuggling vulnerabilities. The Java deserialization scanner is nice. If you do anything with GraphQL, InQL is a really good extension. The JWT editor for any JWT vulnerabilities. It's just really, it makes it really easy, and that's why most of the Portswigger labs for JWT vulnerabilities are like that. Param miner is really good if you're looking for host header attacks or web cache poisoning. And then obviously, as we've already talked about, SQL map. Are there any other extensions you use that I didn't mention?
No, I think that's it. I think for when you're taking the exam, you definitely want to keep your extensions to just what you absolutely need because you don't want to see a lot of false positive alerts in your activity feed. Because getting to identify the vulnerability as quick as possible really seems to be key to passing the exam.
Yeah. And if you've got a bunch of false positives you're convinced of, then you're
Because
in
to my
for.
knowledge, there is no necessarily like rabbit holes in the exam to the extent of like if SQL injection is there, like it's gonna be there. If you scan correctly, it will show, and then if you put in a payload, it'll maybe throw like a 500 or something like that. And if you see all of those things, like you definitely have SQL injection. There's not that's not like a trick. Like I don't think there's any tricks on the exam. Like they
Yeah.
want like a straightforward attack path.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and I think the exam pool is. They say that there's a grace period of 1 month that you can expect between when something is added as a topic to when you could see it on the exam. I think that that's probably true, but it's also kind of BS because like web LLMs came out a few months ago, and that's kind of obscure, and I it's not part of the mystery labs. I would honestly mostly consider stuff that's part of the mystery labs, but if you really want to be sure that you're prepared to take the exam, I would say somehow, right, take 20 of the random apprentice and above or practitioner and above level labs and make sure you can do them blind without actually looking. If you can, try to not look at the title. I mean, that's what the mystery labs are for. But if you can, try to either not look at the title of them or identify the vulnerability that's there without any kind of hints or any extra stuff and walk it all the way through to the end. If you can do that on pretty much every lab without, getting super confused on what vulnerability you're looking for, then I would argue that you're set if you can do that. Like if you can do like 20 mystery labs in a row, no help, less than 15 minutes a pop, then yeah, I would say that you're more than adequately prepared to take the exam in a good amount of time. I think that being said, the only things we want to cover are, let's say you prepared and you took it and you failed, the steps you can take next. I think one thing that I think I can touch on is like, obviously, if you failed, that's like it's going to be demoralizing, but to be fair, like from the time you fail the exam you will never be closer to passing than right after you fail. um in one way of thinking about it. Reed, do you want to go over like what you did, because uh I know that you had more experience with multiple attempts.
Yeah. So I passed on my second attempt. So I think the biggest thing was just identifying the vulnerabilities faster. So going through the mystery labs again and going through and using the scanner properly and like just picking up on like the subtle things of like when you see maybe like an advanced search that looks like there could be SQL in the URL, like starting there, like maybe not or on when you're trying to get the user phase, don't go right to the brute force because that's the easiest one to do, but it's not the most likely one. So maybe looking at the headers and capturing requests and different stuff like that before you just jump to brute force.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then if you did fail, go through your project file that you submitted and see if you missed anything. Because I mean, if that's the case, like, yeah, it sucks that you missed something, and you were able to find it only after looking at it a second time. But it'll show you which specific areas you're weak in, um, especially if you're struggling with finding things quickly and efficiently. If you really hone in on which vulnerabilities you struggle with, like I had a particular amount of difficulty with web cache poisoning, and that ended up being on my exam. But because I, tried to make sure that I prepared adequately beforehand by doing a bunch of the labs and a bunch of the mystery labs and figuring out like what the workflow for it is and feeling it out, just getting familiar with the muscle memory of identifying and exploiting it. Um, I got a lot more comfortable with it. So, I mean, that's really like if you failed, figure out why, figure out what your weak points are, adjust, build up those weak points into more strong points, and then give it another go. I don't really think like I don't know between exam attempts. I would say don't wait any longer than a month. I also know that Portswigger is known to give like if anything wrong happened during your exam, like I don't know technical difficulties, they're pretty if support wasn't available, they're pretty prone to giving you second attempts. But that's only some stuff I've heard through the grapevine in a manner of speaking. So I wouldn't really take it as fact. But aside from that, let's say you fail, you give it a second attempt and you pass. All that there really is next to do after this is, you'll be using like the Examity proctoring software, and then once you complete all 6 stages in your exam, you'll upload your project file, and then it'll take you 3 to 5 business days, is what they say. There's some stuff on their website that says 48. I emailed them. The actual number is 3 to 5 business days, where you'll actually get your certification in the in your web security like academy, your Portswigger account, and then you can just go to your account, your certification section, and then it's there and it's ready to send off. But that's really all I think I've got for this read. Do you have anything you want to add before I wrap up?
No, I think I'm good.
All right, well, that's all we've got to cover for this. So we'll go ahead and catch you in the next one. And thanks to Reed for chipping in here.